Greetings, researchers! Welcome to this channel, where we break the paradigms of the Enlightenment and uncover the truths about the oldest people in the world, the Slavic people. Listen without envy to the one who speaks the truth. In the previous episode, we examined the time of Constantine the Great, during which Ulfila was prepared for his apostolic mission among the Goths and the Scythians, both within the Roman Empire and beyond it, across the Danube. We also examined the time of Theodosius the Great and how, with the help of the Goths, he attained his title, the Great. Today we will continue with the figure of Ulfila, because he is key to understanding what kind of people the Goths were, Germanic or Scythian. Modern scholarship claims that the Goths were a Germanic people based on two main arguments. The first is the presence of Germanic names in the Gothic naming system. The second argument is the Codex Argenteus, the Silver Codex. It is claimed that this work is a copy of Ulfila's translation, but the text is not dated, is not signed, and contains German words. Linking it to Ulfila's is a hypothesis that has been transformed into evidence. It is precisely on the basis of this hypothesis that the Gothic people are today considered Germanic. But in order to understand whether this is truly the case, we must trace the environment in which Ulfila carried out his translation of the Bible. Only then can we understand. Was he translating for a Germanic-speaking population or for a Scythian-speaking population? From Jordanes, in the previous episode, we learned that Ulfila belonged to the Lesser Goths who lived in Moesia. Therefore, we must now trace what the ancient authors tell us through the centuries about the population of Moesia. The following is a quotation from Getae. Hear also of the famous and praiseworthy bravery of these men. The historian Dio, the most diligent investigator of antiquity, who gave his work the title, Getae, and that the Getae are Goths, as we proved above, is attested by Orosius and Paul, mentions that after a long time they had a king named Telephus. And lest anyone say that this name is entirely foreign to the Gothic language, let no one be surprised, since it is customary for peoples to borrow names from one another. The Romans from the Macedonians, the Greeks from the Romans, the Sarmatians from the Germans, and the Goths most often from the Huns. This Telephus, the son of Hercules, born of Age and related by marriage to Priam's sister, was indeed tall in stature, but even more formidable in strength, matching his father's courage with his own virtues. He resembled Hercules even in his physical appearance. Therefore, the ancestors called his kingdom Moesia. This region has the mouths of the Danube River to the east, Macedonia to the south, Istria to the west, and the Danube itself to the north. The following is a commentary. In this passage, Jordanes clearly shows us where the region of Moesia is located, the land in which the Lesser Goths of Ulfila would later live. But if we want to understand what language was spoken in this region, we must follow how ancient authors described the population of these lands throughout the centuries. And here we come to one of the most important cities in the entire Scythian world, the city of Tomis. The following is a quotation from Getae, then Queen Tomiris. Exalted by victory and rich plunder, crossed into the part of Moesia which is now called Lesser Scythia, after the name borrowed from Greater Scythia, and there, on the Moesian shore of the Pontus, founded the city of Tomis, named after herself. The following is a commentary. Here Jordanes provides us with another extremely important testimony. According to his account, as early as the 6th century BC, Queen Tomiris crossed into the lands of Moesia and founded the city of Tomi in the region that already bore the name Lesser Scythia. This is extremely important because it shows us that, centuries before the time of Ulfila, the lands around Tomi and the lower Danube were associated with the Scythians and the Getae. Thus, From the very beginning of his narrative, Jordanes builds a clear picture. Moesia, Lesser Scythia, Tomis, Goths, Getae, and Scythians are all parts of one and the same historical world. And if we want to understand what language was spoken in that world during the time of Ulfilas in the 4th century AD, we must follow what ancient authors tell us about the city of Tomis itself and its population over the centuries that followed. The following is a quotation from Ovid. "And yet the spirit of Ausonian, Roman, speech has not vanished from my words, although the whole land is barbarous and full of Getae. Numerous Sarmatian and Getic tribes ride back and forth along the roads. Among them there is hardly a man who can answer my questions in Latin or reply in any language other than Getic. And I myself have already learned to speak Getic and Sarmatian, and you will hardly be surprised that barbarian words echo in my speech." Elsewhere Ovid writes the following, "Here, although weapons rattle everywhere around me, I ease my sorrowful fate with songs. For there is no Roman people here, nor do the wild crowds of barbarian Getae know my name." The following is a commentary. Ovid was sent into exile in the city of Tomis in AD 8 by order of Emperor Augustus. Around AD 12 to 13. He wrote the work Epistulae ex Ponto, from which these quotations are taken. He writes with hostility toward the place to which he was sent, but for that very reason his testimony is so valuable. Ovid repeatedly speaks of city walls, gates, streets, a harbor, a population, and a garrison. That means that Tomis was not a small settlement, but a real city within the Roman Empire. Yet despite this, Ovid tells us something extremely important. The population around him spoke the Getic and Sarmatian languages. He even admits that he himself began learning Getic. Thus, we see that in the 1st century AD, the population around Tomis continued to be described as Getic, the same Getae and Scythians whom Jordanes earlier mentions in connection with Queen Tomiris. Therefore, between the story of Tomiris and the time of Ovid, we see no change in either the population or the linguistic environment of this region. The following is a quotation from John Chrysostom. From the first homily on the Gospel of John, Homilia I in Joannum, the Scythians and Thracians, the Sauromatians, the Indians, and the Persians. By conveying the divine teachings in their own language, though barbarians learned wisdom. The following is a commentary. John Chrysostom lived at the end of the 4th century and the beginning of the 5th century, almost at the same time that Ulfilas lived. Ulfilas died around AD 360, and John Chrysostom was born around AD 347. And it is precisely in this era that John Chrysostom provides us with an extremely important testimony. He lists various peoples who accepted the divine teachings in their own language: Scythians, Thracians, Sauromatians, Indians, and Persians. This is extremely important for our research because Ovid had already told us in the 1st century AD that the population in Tomis spoke the Getic and Sarmatian languages. Now, several centuries later, John Chrysostom once again speaks of the Scythians, Thracians, and Sauromatians, but this time in the context of Christianity and divine teachings. This means that we see continuity not only in the population but also in the linguistic environment of this region. Around AD 398 to 404, several decades after the death of Ulfilas, John Chrysostom delivered an exceptionally important homily in Constantinople, known today as a homily delivered after the Goth had preached, Homilia dicta postquam Gothis concionatus fera. The very title of the work already provides us with important testimony. At that time, a Gothic church existed in Constantinople, there were Gothic clergy, and preaching was conducted in the Gothic language. John Chrysostom even praises this phenomenon and says, and the Goths read the prophetic and evangelical words. Elsewhere in the homily he adds, "Behold the wisdom of the barbarians, behold how even the difference of language did not become an obstacle." These testimonies are extremely important. They show that decades after the death of Ulfilas, the Gothic Christian tradition not only continued to exist, but had already reached Constantinople itself. This means that we are not speaking about a single translation of a single book, but about a living literary and liturgical tradition, with clergy, with preaching, with the reading of the gospel, with manuscript copying, and with worship conducted in the Gothic language. The following is a quotation from Sozomen, Ecclesiastical History, Historia Ecclesiastica, Book 7, Chapter 26. The Church of Tomis, and indeed all the churches of Scythia, were at that time under the leadership of Theotimus, a Scythian. His virtues so impressed the barbarian Huns who lived along the banks of the Ister that they called him the God of the Romans. Because these tribes frequently ravaged Scythia with their incursions, he sought to soften their cruelty by providing them with food and gifts. The following is a commentary. Sozomen wrote his Ecclesiastical History in the first half of the 5th century, approximately between AD 440 and 450. But in this passage he describes events from the late 4th and early 5th centuries, the time of John Chrysostom and Emperor Arcadius. This is extremely important for our research, because we see that around AD 400, Tomis continued to remain a spiritual center. The churches of Scythia existed, and their leader was Theotimus, whom Sozomen himself calls a Scythian. This means that several centuries after Ovid and decades after Ulfilas, the sources continue to speak of Scythia, Scythians, and an organized church structure in this region. Moreover, Sozomen shows that the church in Tomis was not a small local community, but a genuine spiritual center on the Danubian frontier that even communicated with the Hunnic tribes along the Ister. When we connect this testimony with Ovid, Jordanes, Ulfilas, John Chrysostom, and the Gothic Church in Constantinople, a continuous picture of a Scythian Christian tradition in Moesia and Lesser Scythia begins to emerge, enduring through the centuries. In the 6th century, the evidence for the Scythian Christian tradition becomes even clearer and already demonstrates the existence of an organized literary and monastic school in Lesser Scythia. Cassiodorus writes about Dionysius Exiguus, Nachon Scytha, Dionysius Exiguus, a Scythian by nation. This Dionysius Exiguus is one of the most significant figures of the early Christian Middle Ages. It is precisely with his name that the Christian system of dating is associated, which would later be adopted throughout Europe. But for us, something else is important here. Cassiodorus clearly shows us that Dionysius came from the Scythian milieu of Lesser Scythia. At the same time, the sources already speak of the so-called Scythian monks, Monachi Scythi, who actively participated in the great theological controversies of the empire. From Pope Hormisdas, Fulgentius, the Collectio Avellana, and other sources, we learn of the existence of this Scythian monastic school, and among its most famous representatives was John Maxentius. This is extremely important, because we see that centuries after Ulfilas, the lands of Lesser Scythia continued to be a literary center, a theological center, and a spiritual center that participated directly in the ecclesiastical life of the empire. Nor can we fail to mention Jordanes' testimony that the Lesser Goths continued to live in Moesia even in his own time. This is extremely important evidence for our research because Jordanes repeatedly associates the Goths with the Scythian world and presents them as a Scythian people. In the 6th century, In this same region where, according to Jordanes, the Lesser Goths of Ulfilas continue to live, the sources show us a Scythian ecclesiastical environment, Scythian monks, Scythian bishops, and active literary activity. The following is a quotation from Walafrid Strabo, in the regions around Tomi and in the Scythian lands. The liturgy is still performed in the vernacular language, lingua theotisca. The following is a commentary. Walafrid Strabo lived in the 9th century, around AD 808 to 849. He was a Western Christian author from the Frankish world, associated with the Carolingian Empire. This is extremely important for our research because we are dealing with an independent Western author who describes the lands around Tomi and Scythia centuries after the time of Ulfilas. Walafrid Strabo is not speaking merely of some ancient memory from the past, but of a liturgical tradition that still existed in his own time in the Scythian lands around Tomi. This is very important because Ovid, in the 1st century, speaks of the Getic and Sarmatian languages in Tomi. John Chrysostom, in the 4th century, speaks of Scythians, Thracians, and Sarmatians who accepted divine teachings in their own language. Sozomen speaks of the churches of Scythia. In the 6th century we see the Scythian monks and the literary school of Lesser Scythia. And in the 9th century Walafrid Strabo still finds a living liturgical tradition in these lands. His testimony clearly shows that in the lands around Tomi and Scythia, the local ecclesiastical tradition continued to exist for centuries. For this very reason, it becomes increasingly difficult to automatically associate the so-called Silver Codex, Codex Argenteus, which contains Old Germanic words, with the Scythian environment in which Ulfilas lived and worked. And so, in this episode, we learned that Ulfilas carried out his apostolic mission in a Scythian environment. We learned that the Scythians were not merely a geographical concept, but a real people whom the sources describe as Scythians by nationality, speakers of the Scythian language, and possessors of their own ecclesiastical hierarchy. This shatters the myth that the term Scythians is merely a geographical label used for peoples who had nothing to do with the Scythians. Thank you, friends, for watching this video. Subscribe to the channel, and leave your opinion in the comments.